Some notes don't ask for attention, but they can still change a man's life. Logan Whitmore had eaten in private dining rooms above Manhattan, in candlelit restaurants in Chicago, and on a yacht off Newport where a chef flew in fresh truffles before sunset. But none of those meals had ever made his hand stop halfway to the plate the way this one did. The steak in front of him was already cooling, a modest sirloin with a thumb of garlic butter melting over the top, the kind of cut men ordered when they wanted one decent meal without pretending they belonged in a place like this. Around him, silverware chimed against white china, low jazz floated through hidden speakers, and a wall of amber light made every glass of red wine look richer than it probably was. Logan sat alone in a booth near the back, rainwater still darkening the shoulders of his worn coat, his boots leaving faint marks on the polished wood floor. He had come dressed to disappear. Faded jeans, cheap flannel, a jacket with frayed cuffs. Enough to make people decide what he was before he ever spoke. Most of the dining room had already done exactly that. The hostess had hesitated before leading him in. The bartender had looked twice when he asked for water instead of bourbon. A couple at the next table had lowered their voices only after realizing he could hear every word of their judgment. Logan had spent the last 6 weeks walking into his own businesses looking like the kind of man the world ignored, and every night he learned the same lesson in a different accent. People revealed themselves fastest when they thought no one important was watching. He reached for the folded note resting beside the steak knife, a small square of receipt paper tucked under the edge of his plate. The handwriting on the outside was neat and careful, just 2 words written in blue ink. For you. His fingers paused. Then he opened it. A good meal shouldn't be reserved for people who look rich. The words were simple, almost plain, but they hit with the force of memory, slipping past the armor he had spent years building in boardrooms and back seats and penthouses with views too high to feel real. For one breath, the restaurant around him disappeared. Not the clink of glasses. Not the scent of rosemary and seared beef. Not the soft hum of expensive people congratulating themselves on a Wednesday night. Just one handwritten sentence, and the quiet fact that someone had seen him standing in the storm outside the front window, checked the price of the steak when she thought he wasn't looking, and decided his dignity was worth more than the rules of the house. Logan looked up. Across the room, the waitress who had served him was carrying a tray of drinks through the crowded aisle with the graceful speed of someone too tired to waste a single movement. Blonde hair pinned back, black apron tied a little crooked, a smile for one table, an apology for another, and that same steady calm in her eyes when a manager in a charcoal vest leaned close and snapped something sharp enough to tighten her jaw. She didn't look back toward Logan. She had no reason to think the note mattered that much. But it did. Because for the first time in a very long time, a man worth billions was sitting in a steakhouse with a cheap coat on his back, staring at a piece of receipt paper in complete silence, and realizing that the rarest thing in the room was not the food on the plate in front of him. It was the woman who had just treated him like he was human. Claire Bennett had been on her feet since 10 that morning, and by 8:30 that night, the ache in her arches felt as steady as a second heartbeat. The dinner rush had hit hard and never let up. Plates came out too slowly. Guests wanted everything too quickly, and the narrow space between the bar and the kitchen had turned into a river of black aprons, polished shoes, and tightly controlled frustration. The scent of sizzling beef, butter, and red wine clung to her skin, while the knot at the base of her neck tightened every time Trevor Hale called her name in that clipped, impatient voice that somehow made even simple instructions sound like a warning. Trevor liked to remind the staff that this place survived on image. Image meant crisp collars, measured smiles, and knowing which guests were worth extra attention before they ever opened a menu. Claire hated that part, not because she did not understand the business, but because she had learned long ago that people with tired clothes and quiet voices often said thank you more sincerely than the ones wearing watches worth a month of rent. Tonight, though, she could not afford to argue with anyone. Her rent was due in 4 days. Her younger brother Ethan had texted that afternoon asking whether she could help with the deductible on a dental procedure their mother kept putting off. In the front pocket of her apron, tucked behind her order pad, she had $68 in tips and one folded brochure from Hudson Culinary Institute. The paper softened at the corners from being opened too many times during subway rides home. She had promised herself she would apply by summer. She had also promised herself that hope was not the same thing as a plan, and right now plan was winning. An hour earlier, she had dropped a water glass at table 12. It had shattered near the service station, sending bright pieces of crystal across the tile. Nobody got hurt, but Trevor had marched over with that thin smile he wore when he wanted to humiliate someone without raising his voice. He told her the replacement would come out of the breakage pool and then leaned closer, smelling faintly of espresso and expensive cologne. One more mistake tonight, Claire, and I will cut your weekend shifts. He did not need to say the rest. Weekend shifts were where the money was. Lose those, and she would spend the month choosing which bill could wait. So she kept moving, refilled water, cleared plates, smiled at a bachelor party that barely looked at her face, smiled at a couple celebrating an anniversary who complained about the temperature of their asparagus and then thanked her for being sweet, smiled until it felt less like an expression and more like part of the uniform. Then the front doors opened, letting in a wash of cool rain and city noise, and she noticed the man standing just inside the entry. He was tall, broad-shouldered, soaked at the cuffs, and carrying himself with the kind of quiet reserve that usually meant either trouble or exhaustion. Maybe both. The hostess hesitated for half a beat before greeting him, and Claire saw it happen in real time. That quick sorting people did in their heads when they decided who belonged and who did not. Cheap coat. Wet boots. No reservation. Not one of ours. Claire looked away before Trevor caught her watching, but a few minutes later his voice cut across the room. Bennett. Back booth. She grabbed a menu, smoothed her apron, and headed toward the man in the worn flannel. Up close, he looked older than she had first guessed, maybe late 30s, with rain still clinging to the dark hair at his temples and a calm expression that did not match the tension in his hands. He thanked her when she set down the water. Not casually, not automatically, as if he meant it. Claire noticed that kind of thing. She always did. Logan had learned that people rarely revealed who they were during a crisis. They revealed it during ordinary moments when they believed their choices did not matter. That was why he was here, sitting beneath a low amber sconce in the back corner of a steakhouse his company had acquired 18 months earlier, wearing a $30 flannel shirt and a coat he had bought from a secondhand store in Queens. In the pocket of that coat was a slim black notebook with 6 weeks of observations from restaurants, hotels, and private clubs carrying the Whitmore name somewhere in fine print, places that promised warmth and excellence while too often confusing both with status. He had watched valets ignore delivery drivers standing in the rain. He had watched hosts greet wealthy regulars by name while making tired couples wait at empty bars. He had watched managers comp champagne for guests who complained loudly and dismissed dishwashers who worked until midnight without anyone learning their birthdays. Tonight was supposed to be his final stop before a board meeting on Friday where he intended to decide who stayed, who went, and whether the culture he had inherited from a polished set of executives was worth saving. Claire placed the menu in front of him with both hands, the way servers did when they still believed details mattered. "Can I get you started with something other than water?" she asked. Her tone was gentle, but not pitying. Logan glanced at the wine list, then closed it without touching the leather cover. "Just the water is fine, thank you." She nodded as if that answer required no explanation. A minute later, Trevor passed by and slowed just enough to let his gaze fall on Logan's coat, then the worn boots under the table, then the single glass of water. "Special tonight is the 12-ounce ribeye," he said, though he was looking at Claire, not Logan. "Try to guide guests toward the house selections." Claire kept her expression neutral. "Yes, Trevor." When he moved on, the air seemed easier to breathe. Logan opened the menu and took his time. Prices had been adjusted upward after the acquisition, justified in a presentation deck by phrases like brand elevation and premium positioning. To the board, a $6 increase on a steak meant nothing. To a school teacher, a mechanic, a widow celebrating a birthday alone, it meant the difference between feeling welcome and feeling foolish. He let his eyes travel down the list, then tapped the least expensive cut. "I will have the sirloin," he said. "Medium rare, please." Claire wrote it down without blinking. "Would you like mashed potatoes or fries with that?" "Mashed potatoes." "That is a good choice," she said softly, and for the first time all evening Logan almost smiled. Not because of the words themselves, but because she had offered them like a kindness, the way someone might steady a stranger on icy steps without making a ceremony of it. As she turned toward the kitchen window, Trevor intercepted her near the service station. Logan could not hear every word over the music and the hiss from the grill, but he caught enough. One top with water. Sirloin. Watch your table times. Then a sharper sentence, low and unimpressed. Do not babysit people who are not spending. Claire lowered her eyes for a second, not in submission, but in restraint. Then she lifted her chin, balanced two appetizer plates on one arm, and kept moving. Logan watched her disappear into the blur of the dining room and wrote a single line in his notebook beneath the table. Server at back booth maintains dignity under pressure. Manager prioritizes optics over hospitality. Then he closed the notebook and looked up just as Claire returned with a basket of warm bread that he had not ordered. She set it down beside his plate and said, almost like a secret, "The kitchen made extra." Logan knew a gesture when he saw one. He also knew that in rooms like this, small kindnesses often cost the giver more than anyone else would ever see. By the time Logan finished half the bread, the dinner crowd had settled into the polished rhythm expensive restaurants like to sell as effortless. Glasses were refilled before they looked empty. Candle flames held steady in their small circles of light, and the open kitchen sent out waves of heat scented with black pepper, butter, and charred rosemary. But beneath that polished surface, Logan could feel the tension running through the room like a hidden wire. It showed up in the way Trevor hovered near high-value tables and barely glanced toward the back booths. It showed up in the way a junior server received instant help carrying a bottle of Napa Cabernet to a hedge fund partner, while Claire balanced 3 dinner plates alone without asking for anything. And it showed up most clearly when his steak finally arrived. Claire set the plate down in front of him with care, placing the mashed potatoes at 11 o'clock, the steak centered, the sauce dish aligned neatly to the side, as if she were serving the most important guest in the building. "Medium rare, sir," she said. "Please be careful. The plate is hot." The steak glistened under the light, butter already softening over the seared top, and for a second Logan was not thinking like a chief executive or an observer or even a man collecting evidence. He was simply hungry. "Thank you," he said. Claire gave him a small nod and reached to straighten the fork that had shifted near the napkin. It was a tiny gesture, almost invisible, but it carried the kind of respect that could not be faked. At the next table, a man in a navy blazer leaned back in his chair and muttered something to his date, not quietly enough. "That is generous," he said, glancing at Logan's plate. "Maybe they are starting a charity menu." His companion gave a thin laugh into her wineglass. Logan kept his eyes on the steak, though he heard every word. He had spent years in rooms where condescension wore good tailoring and called it self-discernment. Across the aisle, Claire heard it too. He could tell by the faint pause in her breathing. But instead of pretending she had not, she stepped back to his table and asked, in the same professional tone she would have used with a senator or a celebrity, "Would you like fresh cracked pepper?" Logan looked up at her then, not because he needed pepper, but because he understood what she was doing. She was restoring the dignity someone else had tried to take from him, and she was doing it without turning him into a spectacle. "Yes," he said softly. Claire lifted the wooden mill and added a light dusting over the steak. "Anything else I can bring you?" "No," he said. "This is perfect." She smiled, brief but real, and moved on. Trevor appeared less than a minute later, his expression sharpened by irritation. He stopped beside Claire near the service station, thinking the clatter from the kitchen would hide his voice. "You are wasting time on the wrong table," he said. "Read the room." Claire kept stacking bread plates, her face composed. "I am serving my section. You are serving a bill that might not even clear." Logan set down his knife. The words were quiet, but they carried. For a moment, he thought Claire might retreat, might let the insult pass for the sake of rent and weekend shifts and all the compromises survival demanded. Instead, she turned to Trevor with a calm that seemed to rise from someplace deeper than courage. "He is a guest," she said. "That is the room I am reading." Trevor stared at her, stunned less by defiance than by the fact that it had come without apology. Logan watched Claire return to work with steady hands and tired eyes, and something inside him shifted. In 6 weeks of undercover visits, he had seen polished service, efficient service, and performative service. But this was different. This was character. And in Logan Whitmore's world, character was the one thing money had never been able to buy. Claire carried the empty bread basket back toward the service station with her pulse beating harder than it should have for something as simple as walking. Trevor had already moved on to flatter a foretop near the window, his smile back in place, his tone polished, as if the insult he had thrown across the room were just another piece of silverware to be cleared away before dessert. But Claire could still feel it hanging in the air. He is a guest. That is the room I am reading. The words had left her mouth before she could second-guess them, and now they echoed in her chest beside a newer fear. Rent. Weekend. Shifts. The brochure in her apron pocket. Every practical part of her knew that standing up for a stranger was not the kind of choice that paid electric bills. Still, when she looked through the pass and saw Logan sitting alone in the back booth, hands folded near the edge of the table, shoulders steady but not relaxed, she felt the same quiet certainty she had felt the moment he thanked her for a glass of water, as if gratitude still mattered. She picked up his check from the printer and froze for a second when she saw the total. After tax, it was more than anyone wearing that coat should have had to spend for one decent dinner. The house had added a premium for evening service, and Trevor had entered the order under full dining pricing even though the kitchen had plenty of early prep left. Claire did the math in her head and then again in the margin of her order pad. In the apron pocket against her hip, she had $68 in tips, all bills folded lengthwise, all of them already promised to something waiting at home. For a moment, she stood there listening to the kitchen call out temperatures and sides, hearing plates strike the counter, hearing the dishwasher rattle metal racks into place, hearing her own common sense beg her to let it go. Then she remembered the look on Logan's face when Trevor talked about him, as if he were not sitting 3 feet away. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something quieter than that, and somehow worse. The kind of silence people wore when they were used to being misjudged. Claire reached into her apron, slid out a 20, then another 10, and tucked them beneath the check presenter. Her fingers hesitated over the remaining bills. She thought of Ethan. She thought of the brochure. She thought of her mother saying that dignity was the only thing in this world that should never depend on money. Claire took a breath, added another bill, and closed the folder. Then she tore a clean square from the back of a receipt roll and stared at it for half a heartbeat before writing in blue ink, slowly enough to keep her hand from shaking. A good meal should not be reserved for people who look rich. She did not sign it at first. Then, after a second thought that felt larger than it should have, she wrote her name beneath the sentence in smaller letters. The line cook slid Logan's plate onto the counter, sirloin gleaming under a spoonful of garlic butter, mashed potatoes whipped smooth with black pepper scattered over the top. Claire took the plate, tucked the folded note beneath the steak knife, and crossed the dining room before she could lose her nerve. Logan looked up when she reached the table. The room around them was full of laughter and glassware and polished conversations, but when she set the plate down, it felt strangely still. "Medium rare," she said softly. "I hope you enjoy it." His eyes moved from the steak to the folded paper beside it. Claire gave him the smallest nod, the kind that meant this is private, this is yours, and then she stepped away before he could say anything. At the service station, she turned just once. Logan unfolded the note, read the first line, and went completely still. Not the stillness of confusion, not the stillness of offense. The kind that comes when a person has been reached in a place he thought no one could see. And for reasons Claire could not have explained, that mattered to her more than the money already missing from her apron. Logan read the note twice before he took his first bite. The steak was warm, perfectly medium rare, the butter rich with garlic and parsley, but for the next several minutes, he barely tasted it. His attention kept drifting back to the folded scrap of receipt paper resting beside his water glass, to the careful slant of Claire Bennett's handwriting, to the fact that in a room built to impress people with expense, the most powerful thing he had been given all night had cost almost nothing to make. Around him, dinner service rolled on. A server laughed softly near the bar. A bottle of Cabernet was uncorked with a pop and a flourish. Rain tapped against the tall front windows, turning the city beyond the glass into a shimmer of headlights and reflected gold. Logan finished the meal slowly, not out of hesitation but respect, the way a man finishes something that has become more than food. When Claire came back to clear the plate, he looked up at her with a steadiness that made her pause. "It was excellent," he said. "Thank you." She gave him a polite smile, though he could see the fatigue gathering beneath it. "I am glad to hear that." For one second, he considered saying more, telling her that he knew exactly what that note had cost, that kindness like hers was rarer than any item on the menu. But the point of going undercover was to see what people did before reward entered the room. So he simply slid the check presenter toward himself. Inside, the adjusted total reflected what Claire had done. Not enough to draw attention from a distracted guest, but enough for a manager obsessed with numbers to notice. Logan placed several bills inside, more than enough to cover the balance and leave a generous tip, then tucked the note into the inner pocket of his coat as carefully as if it were legal paper. He stood, thanked Claire again, and walked toward the front, passing Trevor on the way. Trevor offered him a smile that was all surface. "Have a good night." Logan met his eyes. "You too." It was the last ordinary sentence Trevor would hear from him. Outside, the rain had softened to a cold mist. Logan crossed to the black SUV parked half a block away and slid into the back seat beside his driver, Marcus, who took one look at his face in the rearview mirror and did not start the car yet. "You found something," Marcus said. Logan rested a hand over the inside pocket of his coat. "I found someone." Back inside the restaurant, Claire was dropping off dessert spoons when Trevor called her into the office behind the kitchen. The room smelled like printer toner, old coffee, and the faint bitterness of stress. He shut the door and held up a copy of Logan's check. "Did you alter a guest bill?" Claire felt her stomach sink even before she answered. "I covered part of it with my tips." Trevor stared at her as if she had admitted to ruining the restaurant's reputation single-handedly. "You do not get to make pricing decisions. I did not ask the house to lose money. I paid the difference myself. That is not the point." His voice stayed low, which somehow made it worse. "You embarrassed management, ignored policy, and inserted yourself into a situation that did not concern you." Claire stood very still, fingers curled around her order pad. She wanted to say that hospitality was exactly her concern, that treating a guest with dignity should never require permission, but she could already see where this was going. Trevor untied the extra apron hanging on the back hook and dropped it onto the desk. "Finish your side work and clock out. Do not come in tomorrow until I decide whether you still have a schedule." The words landed quietly, but they hit hard. Rent. Weekend shifts. Ethan's message. The culinary brochure in her locker. Claire swallowed once and nodded because pride did not pay for groceries. When she stepped back into the bright warmth of the dining room, the music was still playing, candles were still glowing, and nobody looked up. The world had not changed at all. Only hers had. Claire barely slept. Her apartment in Astoria was quiet except for the radiator clicking in uneven bursts and the muffled sound of a delivery truck backing up somewhere below the window before sunrise. She lay awake staring at the water stain on the ceiling above her bed, replaying the night in fragments that would not line up neatly enough to make sense. Trevor's voice in the office. The missing bills from her apron. Logan's face when he read the note. By 6:30, she had given up on sleep, pulled on a clean blouse, and made coffee strong enough to sting. Ethan called while she was tying her hair back, and she let the phone ring twice before answering because she did not trust her voice. He asked how work had gone. She told him it was fine. He told her their mother was pretending not to be nervous about the dental appointment, which meant she was absolutely nervous. Claire stood in the tiny kitchen looking at the cracked corner of the laminate counter and promised she would help however she could. After the call ended, she checked her schedule app 3 times. Her shifts had not been removed, but they had not been confirmed either. At 9:15, while she was deciding whether to take the subway downtown and plead for her job in person, her phone lit up with an unfamiliar number from Midtown. "Claire Bennett?" a woman asked when she answered. "Yes. This is Julia from Whitmore Hospitality Corporate. You are requested at Halstead Steakhouse at 11 o'clock for a staff meeting. Business attire, please." Claire gripped the edge of the counter. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" There was a pause, professional and unreadable. "You have been asked to attend. That is all I can say." The line went dead a second later. For the next 90 minutes, dread followed her like a shadow. She rode the N train into Manhattan with her stomach tight, watching strangers in suits scroll through their phones while the city flashed by in dark tunnels and sudden light. By the time she reached the restaurant, a Blacktown car was parked at the curb, and 2 men in tailored coats stood by the door speaking into discreet earpieces. Inside, the dining room looked different in daylight. Without candles and evening music, the room was all polished edges and expensive restraint. Every employee had been called in. Servers stood in neat rows near the bar, whispering behind coffee cups. Line cooks lingered by the kitchen doors in clean coats. Trevor stood near the front with his jaw set and his tie too tight, wearing the expression of a man trying very hard to look informed. When he saw Claire enter, his eyes narrowed for half a second before smoothing over. "You are late," he said, though she was not. Before she could answer, the front doors opened again. The room went still so quickly it felt like someone had lowered the volume on the world. Logan Whitmore walked in wearing a charcoal suit cut so cleanly it seemed to sharpen the air around him. No worn coat, no flannel, no wet boots, just quiet authority, a white dress shirt, and the same steady eyes that had met hers across a back booth the night before. Behind him came two executives Claire recognized from framed company photos near the office, followed by Julia from corporate, holding a tablet against her chest. Trevor's face drained of color one careful degree at a time. Logan stopped in the center of the dining room, looked once around the staff, then let his gaze rest on Claire. Not long enough to embarrass her, just long enough to let her know she had not imagined anything. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and unmistakably in command. "I am Logan Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Hospitality. And last night, I had dinner in this restaurant." No one moved. The espresso machine behind the bar gave a single sharp hiss, and then even that seemed too loud for the silence settling over the room. Claire felt the blood rush in her ears as every piece of the night before rearranged itself into something she had never seen coming. The quiet man in the worn coat, the careful thank you, the way he had looked at the note as if it mattered more than the meal. Logan Whitmore stood a few feet away now, composed and impossible to mistake for anything less than powerful, and yet his expression had not hardened. If anything, it was steadier, almost gentler, than the one he had worn in the back booth. "Over the past 6 weeks," he said, "I have visited properties across this company without announcing who I was. I wanted to see how people are treated when there is no advantage in treating them well." His gaze moved across the room, past the bartenders, the kitchen staff, the hosts, and finally stopped on Trevor. "What I found in this restaurant was excellent food, polished presentation, and a culture problem serious enough that it will be addressed immediately." Trevor cleared his throat and stepped forward with a strained smile. "Mr. Whitmore, if there were any misunderstandings last night, I would appreciate the chance to explain the context." Logan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The context is that a guest was judged before he was served. The context is that management treated dignity like a perk to be earned instead of the standard we owe every person who walks through our doors. And the context is that one employee chose character when it would have been easier to choose silence. Claire felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Heat climbed into her face, and for one awful second she wished she could disappear into the pantry beside the kitchen and stay there until the world became ordinary again. Logan reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and unfolded the small piece of receipt paper. Even from where she stood, Claire recognized the blue ink. "This," he said, holding it carefully between his fingers, "was given to me with my dinner last night." He read the note aloud, slowly, without adding a single extra word. When he finished, the room stayed silent, but it was a different silence now. Not dismissive, not cold, the kind that comes when truth has landed where everyone can feel it. Logan lowered the paper and looked directly at Claire. "Miss Bennett, you used your own tips to preserve the dignity of a stranger you believed might be struggling. You did it quietly, without audience, and knowing it could cost you. That is hospitality. That is leadership." Trevor started to speak again, but Julia from corporate stepped forward first. "Trevor Hale," she said evenly, "your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will assist you with collecting your personal belongings." Trevor's mouth opened, then closed. No one rushed to defend him. Claire watched him look around for support that did not come, and for the first time since walking in, her breathing steadied. Logan took one step closer to her, enough to speak to her instead of the room. "Claire, you are not here to beg for your shifts back." A flicker of disbelief crossed her face. Logan continued, his voice warm but clear. "I would like to offer you a place in our Hospitality Leadership Fellowship. Full salary, full benefits, mentorship at the corporate level. The work will be demanding, and the position will be earned every day, but you have already shown me the one quality I cannot teach." Claire stared at him, then at the note in his hand, then at the polished floor beneath her shoes as if she needed something solid to keep from drifting out of the moment. When she finally looked up, her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "I do not want charity, Mr. Whitmore." Logan's answer came without hesitation. "Good," he said. "I am not offering charity. I am offering opportunity to the most qualified person in the room." Claire did not answer Logan that morning with gratitude or tears or anything dramatic enough to match the stunned faces around them. She answered the way she had served tables, quietly and with care. She said she would accept the fellowship only if she could be evaluated like anyone else, trained like anyone else, and dismissed like anyone else if she failed to do the job. Logan had looked at her for a moment, then nodded once, almost as if that was the answer he had hoped for. 3 months later, Claire stood in the test kitchen of Whitmore Hospitality headquarters on West 42nd Street, wearing a tailored navy blazer instead of a black apron, with a badge clipped at her waist and a city skyline of glass and steel glowing beyond the conference room windows. The program had been harder than anything she imagined. Early meetings, financial reports, brand audits, service models, vendor calls, tasting panels that demanded precision and restraint instead of instinct alone. More than once, Claire had gone home with aching feet and a head full of numbers, wondering whether Trevor had been right about one thing, whether she really had reached too far beyond the life she knew. But every time doubt started talking too loudly, she remembered the note, the back booth, and the simple truth that kindness had opened a door, but only discipline could carry her through it. Logan never made things easier for her just because he could. If anything, he expected more. He challenged her ideas, sent her back to redo proposals that sounded sentimental instead of practical, and asked questions sharp enough to cut through anything vague. Yet he also listened in a way few powerful men ever did, fully and without rushing. And when Claire proposed a new pilot program built around one sentence, "Dignity first," he did not smile at it like it was naive. He asked how fast they could launch it. The first event took place on a rainy Thursday evening at the very restaurant where they had met. The dining room had been redesigned with warmer lighting, simpler menus, and a new training standard that treated courtesy as a baseline rather than a reward. For one night each month, the house would serve a full-steak dinner at cost to teachers, transit workers, home health aides, and anyone nominated by local community groups for carrying more than most people ever saw. No speeches, no publicity stunt, just one good meal in a room that no longer made dignity feel expensive. Claire had spent the entire day checking place settings, reviewing service timing, and making sure no guest would feel like a charity case. By 7 o'clock, every table was full. Coats hung over chairs. Laughter rose softly under the music. Candlelight flickered across polished glasses. Near the kitchen doors, Ethan was grinning through his second helping of mashed potatoes, and their mother, finally pain-free after her dental work, kept dabbing at the corner of her eyes and pretending it was only the pepper in the air. Claire was straightening a menu near the back booth when Logan approached. No crowd around him this time. No board members, no executives, just a dark suit, rolled shirt sleeves, and that same steady presence that had first made her feel seen before she knew his name. In his hand was a small frame wrapped in brown paper. "You should have this," he said. Claire took it and peeled the paper back slowly. Inside, preserved beneath clear glass, was the note she had written on receipt paper with tired hands and borrowed courage. The blue ink had faded only slightly. "A good meal should not be reserved for people who look rich." Below it, in a smaller line, her own name. Claire looked up at him, and for a second the noise of the room softened around the edges. "You kept it." Logan smiled, not like a chief executive making a point, but like a man telling the truth. "That note did more than pay for a steak," he said. "It reminded me what this company was supposed to be. It reminded me what I was supposed to be." Claire held the frame against her chest, feeling something warm and unguarded settle into place inside her. "And now?" she asked. Logan glanced around the room at the full tables, the staff moving with genuine care, the guests who looked comfortable enough to laugh without checking the prices first. Then he looked back at her. "Now I think the best things in my life started the moment someone chose kindness when she had every reason not to." Claire laughed softly, because for once she did not need to protect herself from the moment by stepping away from it. She stood beside him in the back booth where everything had begun, with rain silvering the windows beyond the dining room and candlelight catching in the frame between her hands, and when Logan reached for her free hand, she let him take it. Not because he was wealthy, not because he had changed her life, but because somewhere between a plate of steak and a room remade by grace, they had both found something rarer than fortune. They had found a love built on respect, tested by truth, and served, at last, without disguise.